See people piling onto the call now. So as you're arriving, just a really big welcome to our lunchtime event, which is led by our Green peer, Natalie Bennett, and in conversation with our candidates for Mayor in Bristol and London, Sandy Hore-Ruthven and Sian Berry. So yeah, big welcome to you all, and can see the numbers coming up. We've got 115 on the call so far, which is fantastic. So before we kick off, just a few notes on kind of how this lunchtime event is going to work. So essentially, we're going to have, there's a Q&A box that you can use to raise your questions. I should say that it's going to be quite a short, snappy lunchtime event, so we probably won't be able to cover all questions, but do pop your questions there. In a second, I'm going to add our campaign hashtags to the chat box, so please do use those to support Sian and Sandy's campaign. And also just to let you know that this event is being recorded by the Green Party, so can be watched afterwards. So yeah, welcome everybody, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Natalie. So thank you, Natalie.
Well, thank you very much, Emma, and thank you everyone who's joining us this lunchtime, and particularly Sandy and Sian. It's really exciting to be chairing this event for London, for the London Mayor and the Bristol Mayor. Sian Berry and Sandy Hore-Ruthven are our two great candidates, and we're getting close to the election now. Huge amount of work still to be done, huge amount of shoe leather that we can put out there to really make a difference. And if we look around the world, the position of mayor really is a huge opportunity. We can see what Greens are doing with that around the world. Many people might know that there's been a Green mayor in the major French city of Grenoble for quite some time, and that's really known as a place where huge achievements have been made. When I was looking around for this, I hadn't realised that Poitiers, another French city, has actually a 30-year-old female Green mayor. And you're going to the other side of the world, Dunedin in New Zealand also has a Green mayor. And there are 30 elected mayors in US cities, which was something I didn't know until I looked this up. So their campaigns in Bristol and London give us a huge opportunity to really set the agenda, get a record result, and they can really make a difference for people and planet. When we think about the climate, there's about 75% of greenhouse gas emissions come from cities. And when we think about how much we need to do to tackle poverty and inequality in our cities, this really is a huge thing. But you're not here to listen to me. I'm going to start by, perhaps since we're bringing together two cities from either side of the country, it's a good chance for the candidates to introduce themselves so everyone can know who we're hearing from. So to start with you, Sandy, what made you get into politics?
Oh gosh, well thanks Natalie. Why did I get into politics? I guess I'm a person who really likes to change things. I'm somebody who wants to see real change, real reduction in carbon emissions, real change in young people's lives, older people's lives. So that's why I'm interested in politics. I'm particularly interested in becoming mayor, because I think it's a different role to, say, being an MP, which is very much about policy and the sort of big ideas. I'm keen on actually converting that policy and making it real for people's lives. I'll give you a quick example. So my day job is I'm chief executive of a big charity called Creative Youth Network that works with young people. And I was working, this is a few years ago now, in one of the poorer areas of the city with a young man, 18 years old, third generation unemployed, but wanted to make something of his life. So we started to look for sort of employment opportunities for him. And what became clear is that about 80% of the jobs that he could apply for in some of the warehouse works, cleaning works in the city centre, that kind of thing, he couldn't get to simply because the public transport system was so bad. Right. And there for me is the combination of, we need good public transport to tackle the climate emergency and air pollution, but we also need good public transport to make sure that disadvantaged young people and older people have the opportunities that they need. So for me, that's kind of combination of equality and environmental issues and being able to make a real difference in a city like Bristol. That's what motivates me, and that's why I'm doing this.
Thanks very much, Sandy. And that very much reflects the last time I think we were actually physically in the same space together, which was on the brilliant climate strike march in Bristol, when the young climate strikers had organised 10,000 people marching through the streets of Bristol. And the sun was shining, and it now feels like a very long time ago. Yeah. But I'm going to put the same question now to Sian, while also reflecting back on when I think one of the early times you and I were working together, 2006, there's a photo round from the Camden New Journal of you and I campaigning on Kentish Town High Street against air pollution, which very much follows on from what Sandy was just saying. So Sian, the same question to you, what got you into politics?
I'd love to talk about this because I wasn't into politics for most of my life. I was just living my normal life, and I have a science background, and I just kind of thought everybody would behave rationally and everything would be sorted out and things would be fine. And then I got into my mid-20s and I'd started to be involved in the world, and I started to realize how things work, and just genuinely realized that the world was not being well run, that things weren't going the right way, that actually something needs to change, and I should probably step up and try and do something about it. And I've always combined campaigning on different issues with being involved in politics. I spent a long time as a road campaigner, working with people all around the country, trying to get bypasses and extra wide motorways cancelled, and that money invested instead in greener transport. And yeah, for years and years I've worked on air pollution issues right back from when me and you were standing on the side of Kentish Town Road, just being absolutely appalled. I can't even imagine how bad the air pollution must have been then, because it's still bad, and we've cleaned up a lot of vehicles since then. But I did realise, basically, as part of my campaigning work, is you can play whack-a-mole with these bypasses and these big new road projects, and you can try and solve each problem as it comes along, each community centre they want to close, or youth centre, or you can try and fight for individuals to change their ways of doing things. In the end, you've got to fix the system, and that means getting involved at the top level where the decisions are made. And I really like Sandy, I really like the scale of standing for mayor. The mayor of London has a decent amount of powers, a really big budget, like £20 billion or so of money that we can spend every year that can be reprioritised towards things that really matter. And so this is my ideal job, I think, and I'm really, really pleased to be standing for it for the third time. And hopefully I'll get re-elected to the Assembly with a bigger group, or I could even be the first Green Mayor of London. And like you say, Natalie, there are Green Mayors all over Europe. We do exist. And I've met quite a few. In fact, I've met one from Australia recently as well. So there are Greens all over the place running cities and urban areas, and it's really the place where you can genuinely make a difference and really fix systems and rules and priorities in a way that makes a difference all the way down, so that the people on the ground don't have to keep firefighting and trying to get rid of bad decisions one by one. We can genuinely make a difference in this job.
Yep, no, I think I've often said we have to stop electing the wrong people and hoping they'll do the right things, or just trying to lobby them to do the right things. And actually, I mean, one of the ways in which you and Caroline Russell, your fellow London Assembly member, made a difference recently was really leading the way in getting London to be the biggest city in the world to call for a universal basic income trial. And, next step up, probably, yes, would be the biggest city in the world to have a Green Mayor. So next step upwards. So I think you've already got into really is why do elections for being mayor really matter. So I'll come to you, Sandy, now about you in Bristol. What does the position of mayor mean? What could be done with it?
Well, I think we can get into specifics. So, livable neighbourhoods, we're looking to implement a UBI trial, but also things like net gain. So looking at how we increase the amount of biodiversity in new development. So if we're taking a brownfield site, how do we make sure there's more wildlife and more biodiversity within new developments? Carbon charging again for new development. So there's all these ideas that you can trial in a city in a way that actually maybe you can't out in the shires. So and I think also we're in a really unique moment. Actually, I think people are coming out of the pandemic. I was only down in a part of the city where there's a risk of a big ring road being built there. Chatting to a lady walking her dog as we were making a video, and she just said, look, we've all realized how important this open space is for us. The clean air that we're now breathing, that sense of community that will be ruined by a huge great road going bang through the middle of this part of the city. And so I think that there is an openness to change in a way that there hasn't been before, and therefore I think the Green Party has a sort of particularly unique opportunity at this moment. I think the Labour Party is also a little bit weak, so therefore we have that opportunity there. And once once we get some sort of power, we can start to prove that this stuff
I think we may have just had a Sandy frozen there, so I'm going to go to Sian while the technical hitch has a moment with the technical hitch. So Sian, just on the mayoral elections and the London elections more broadly, people don't always sort of know how it all works and what the kind of possibilities are for the Greens, both in the mayoral and the elections. So perhaps if you can just explain to people how they work.
No problem. The London Mayor and the Assembly elections both work differently to a normal general election or a council election. It's not first past the post in either of them. It's not a two-horse race, it's a two-vote race for mayor. You have to vote for a first preference and then vote for a second preference. And those votes have to be for people, for different candidates. So people have a real positive choice they can make to put the Greens first, and then your second choice vote can be used for insurance. That counts just the same if your first choice candidate doesn't make it into the first two in deciding who the final winner is in the second round. Now for the Assembly it's even better, because we have a system like you have in Scotland, like you have in I'm trying to think now, where else do you have this system? Germany has this system, Wales has the same system. So you vote for a local representative in your constituency, and then we have a set of 11 London Assembly members who are elected by a ballot paper where you vote for a party, and that's proportional. So you end up with a London Assembly that exactly matches the votes that Londoners cast, and that's just a far more balanced thing than what you see across a lot of councils in London particularly, which are very dominated by one party. And we know that one party states where there aren't lots of people holding them to account, where the people are heavily whipped who sit on the council, they make bad decisions. You can see that happening all over the country, and the London Assembly is not like that. We don't have any party with a majority. Anyone who wants to get a motion passed, so you said that we got the basic income support from the London Assembly. There's everybody has to work together to get other parties to agree to get anything through, and that's just really, really healthy. And we've had Greens elected to the London Assembly since 2000, since it was first created, using this system, and we're hoping for a record number of Green Assembly members at the end of this as well. There's a power that the London Assembly has, which most people don't realise, which is the power to vote down the mayor's budget. And you only need 1/3 of London Assembly members to vote against the mayor's budget for this to happen. So we've had Greens in the past holding the balance of power over the mayor's budget. And under Ken Livingstone from 2004 to 2008, we made a massive difference. We got the first living wage calculated in London. We actually made him do work on the climate for the first time. And he was not interested in that until Greens started to pester him. And the cycling budget was increased about just a huge amount, like tenfold, having been under threat of being cut altogether. These are real genuine differences you can make once you get that power. And in the London Assembly, it's much easier to win that balance of power because it's a fair system. It's one that involves parties working together, and that's just what I like to see.
Indeed, and democracy, it's a great idea, and a parliament or an assembly that actually reflects the views of the people who are voting for it. What a radical idea. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have it in the UK as well? But sort of coming on to that, you were talking about some of the green achievements, the environmental achievements, as well as the social justice achievements. But why does it really matter? How can we change cities? What does greening our cities really mean? Sandy, I'm glad to see that you're back and fully with us. So I'll come to you first on this one. What's your vision of greening Bristol look like?
Yeah, sorry about that. There was a power cut, would you believe it? So the whole thing went off. So there we go. That's a lucky I'm back. Only a short one, but the whole thing just went. Gosh, so sorry, I've just had to leg it downstairs and flick my switch to bring it all back on. Anyway, so vision for a green city. So look, I think for me, at the heart of it is what we're calling, and really taking from what Paris has done, the idea of a 15-minute city. So being able to, that you have sort of all of the basic needs in your community. So GP surgery, a primary school, local shops, all within a 15-minute walk. Because actually what that does, it deals with the system as a whole, as opposed to just sort of, you know, pedestrianising a street here, or you know, putting some traffic calming in there, or you know, it means it starts to recreate communities and bring people together. It creates local jobs. And of course, it reduces our need to travel so much across the city. So that's the sort of big vision that we have. We also, of course, were the first city to declare a climate emergency, led by Green councillors. So we have a target for net zero. So if we're going to hit net zero, we've got a lot of work to do. And so looking at kind of putting in heat networks again around communities. But the big one for us actually is transport. So it's the only area where our carbon emissions are rising. Actually, you know, electricity production is getting better. You know, heat, and there are alternatives. We need big money to do that, and frankly, we need central government money. So we'll be banging on their door for that. But actually, transport is the bit that we can really tackle as a city. So making sure our buses are better. So we've offered kind of half-price bus fares for young people. You know, and improving bus lanes across the city so they're effectively like trains through Bristol. So there's all sorts of kind of ideas there. We've got to get car travel down by about 40% over the next 10 years, but we think we can do it, but we have to start now. And I've got to say, and maybe of course I'm biased, but I think we're the only ones with that big vision for the city. We're not seeing the sort of environmental issues and nature and even things like equality sort of feel like bolt-ons to the other parties. It's sort of something that you add, but honestly, when push comes to shove and there's difficult decisions to be made, those bolts fall off and they go back to the old way of building roads, economic development, without thinking about the environment. So I think that's the difference we bring. It's in our DNA, and it will really, as we go through those difficult decisions, we'll make them and then prove, I think, that this is not something to fear. It's something actually that will make our communities better places to be. And when that happens, I hope that will ripple out across both Bristol and further out across the country.
Thanks very much, Sandy. And you were making me think of a European Green meeting I was at, and it was a Dutch city, I think it was Rotterdam, was actually tearing out their gas heating infrastructure. And what they were doing, it was a very poor, poorly built sort of 1970s council, what we call a council house suburb. And they were actually tearing out the gas infrastructure, insulating all of the housing to passive house standards. And that was being done. They were training up people from that community to actually do the work in community. Yeah. So it was just that wonderful combination of economic and environmental justice.
And I'll just chip in a couple of there's a great example of one of the very poorest communities in the city who are building a wind turbine that's got planning permission. They've got the funding. It's now literally a matter of the sort of practicalities of putting it up. It's going to make cheap electricity, green electricity for some of the poorest communities in our city. And that for me is just the kind of, those ideas that scale them up so they cover the whole city and not just, one or two communities.
Brilliant. Sounds great. Sian, over to you, a green vision of London.
There's so much that needs to change. I mean, this is the thing. And I think people are crying out for a new start, things that really transform the city in very dramatic ways. And at a London level, we're genuinely pushing for an absolute transformation in the city, something that really builds a secure future and creates a healthy city in terms of our environment, a healthy city in terms of our society, that brings down things like inequality, that genuinely builds up a city that thrives, where everybody has an opportunity and everybody's got the space to live and a secure home. And these are really big things. And that's, I think, what people are up for at the moment. They are up for seeing a big plan that genuinely fixes the system. And obviously at a city level, there are only so many things that you can pull, only so many levers. But I think our manifesto for London, which I'm extremely proud of, by the way, here's the manifesto. Please go read it. It's quite long. It's longer than it was this time last year when the election was cancelled, because we've had to think about things in the context of the coronavirus crisis. But in all honesty, the principles, the themes, the ways in which we want to solve London's problems are not that different, because I think a lot of what Greens were already putting forwards before the crisis were the elements we need in our recovery plan, that deep transformation of the city. So yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot in there about creating the right targets. Sandy talked about having a target for Bristol to reduce traffic. Like no other party actually will make a target to reduce the amount of traffic, but it's absolutely key that we go on a mission to reduce the amount of miles driven in our city, because it leaves us space on the streets to make streets healthier, to make it easier to walk and cycle around, to be able to go out and sit on the streets and eat and socialize, and for children to play. Setting the right targets, fixing the system in that way is so important. The same goes for housing, where obviously in London we've got a very, very acute housing crisis, but places like Bristol it's not good either. And we have we have a human right to a decent and secure home, and it's not being respected by current policies. But if you take that as your starting point and you look at what's missing in the policies, it's really obvious that the mayors of the cities around the country need to be banding together to get this power for us to exercise as mayors, so the power to set housing policy in our own cities. And that involves, more renters' rights, more support for council housing, more support for community-led housing, different approaches to land that aren't just about profit, and the power to set rent controls. And I think, if Sandy gets elected, and we'll have different parties elected in different cities around the country, and I think as a campaigner, I know that a cross-party grouping of people getting together, showing evidence and asking for something is the way to get these powers from government. But finally, on transport and carbon and waste, we're the only ones who really think about this stuff. And one thing I want to set for London is a target, another one, for us to be genuinely zero waste and for us to reduce the production of waste. And we don't currently have that. We have a target to reduce what we send to landfill, and we have a target to recycle a proportion of what we produce. And what that really is a target to burn a lot of our waste. And we have within London big incinerators burning and burning and burning lots of waste, and genuine incentives to produce more waste to feed those incinerators. And that's completely wrong. And what I like about this target is, once you've got a target to reduce the amount of waste you produce in the first place, you end up knowing, and resources follow into doing more repair and reuse, and trying to reduce the amount of things that you throw away in the first place. And then when you think about recovery, just thinking about the amount of electronic devices that are thrown away that could be repaired and used to heal the digital exclusion that there is in the population, you start to see how linked up all our policies are. They're about reducing resource use and reducing inequality, genuinely building a healthier city from the ground up. Now in London, we have virtually complete powers over transport. And one thing I've promised to do is to achieve zero carbon transport in London by 2030. And this is something the current mayor hasn't done, says he can't do it without more powers from government. I believe we've got the powers to do this within London already, and that's something I've absolutely promised to do. So I hope people are seeing that Greens genuinely want to change things, that we've got ideas that the other parties take up eventually, and that we want to fix the system, and we want to do it in ways that help people, help the city, and help us achieve what the planet needs us to do as well, so that we don't face an ecological.
And I'll chip in there just because there's about in the mid-90s, it's lost a little bit in the midst of time. I used to run the Friends of the Earth office in Bristol, and myself and two others led a campaign at the time. You talked about incineration. There was the city council wanted to build a big incinerator in the sort of port of Bristol, which is called Avonmouth, and so we managed to persuade them. What was a very sort of emerging industry at the time, but recycling, sort of curbside recycling. We managed to persuade Bristol City Council at the time to invest instead in a curbside recycling scheme. And that's why Bristol has one of the highest recycling rates in the country, because it's about 25 or 30 years old as a system, and people now take it for granted. But not only is it good for recycling, it creates loads of jobs. So in the north of the city, we are now a centre for recycling, and recycling is shipped probably not ideally, but from all over the country to here, and people have copied our system. So for me, it's a really good example of what a forward-thinking city can do by proving all of this stuff. Then suddenly people say, oh, we can do it. This is something we can do. It's not scary. It does really create jobs and keeps the economy going. Brilliant. So let's do more of that. And our ideas keep getting stolen by everybody else. So if you want green, vote green, and we'll get it done quicker.
I say cut out the middleman, Sandy.
Cut out the middleman, yeah, all women, and just go green. Yeah.
Yeah, Greens lead and others follow.
Yeah.
That's we're used to that, but we don't have the time for the lag time anymore. We need to make the changes now. Sandy, I think just because Sian was talking a lot about housing, it might be worth just perhaps if you have to give you a minute to just reflect on the housing situation, because it is so crucial to so many people's lives.
Yeah, and we do, like London, have a housing crisis in the city, and unfortunately our current mayor has tried to rely on the private sector to build affordable homes, which really hasn't worked. He set himself a target and underachieved by more than 50%. So I've committed to building 2,000 new council homes. Frankly, it's not enough, but it's all that we can afford given the current system. We would absolutely love to work with Sian and other mayors across the country to A, stop the right to buy, and B, be able to borrow more or have more money to build more council homes, because we have 13,000 people on our council house waiting list in Bristol. So that for me is the key one. We've also committed to insulating all of the existing council homes, again as a way of proving that it can be done, as a way of proving that it will lower bills for the poorest and most vulnerable in our city, and we think it will create about 10,000 new jobs and help our economic recovery. So we've got a plan. And I suppose the other thing I would say as well, and knowing Sian a little bit, we get down into that detail too. So we're being challenged, well, how can you can't promise to do that, the current mayor hasn't done it. Well, the reason the current mayor hasn't done it is because he doesn't understand how much you can borrow, how much you can not borrow, or what the possibilities are. And so I think as well, because we've spent so long working this stuff out, we really know the detail. And I look at our manifesto and Sian's manifesto and manifestos. I spoke to Steve up in the West Midlands the other day. Our manifestos are detailed. We know what we're doing. And actually can carry it out. And I've been really clear that I'm not promising things that I can't deliver. That for me is really important, that we're trusted with the money, that we're trusted with not making crazy and sort of wild promises. So I think that's something that the Green Party, both on housing but a whole range of other issues too, the more we can get that message across, and I think people are looking for that alternative. Certainly a lot of Labour voters are looking for that alternative. If we can convince them we're both visionary and ambitious but also sensible, actually that's a winning combination.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because people think of us as being the people who look too far in the future, unrealistically far in the future, but the time is creeping on. We haven't got long, and we have to start really making a difference now. And I think people do want to know that we've got the plans worked out. And that's the thing about being on the London Assembly for 5 years now. And I'm obviously following in the footsteps of people, Darren and Jenny, who were on the London Assembly for 16 years before me. We know what was possible and wasn't done, because these are proposals we've put forwards in the past. And we also understand what could be done. So the thing I talk about in terms of housing in London is we've got this big housing investment budget, and some of it's sitting on the shelf unspent. And I'm going to frighten you now, Sandy, by telling you that's £500 million we've got in London sitting on the shelf unspent in terms of our housing grant from government. And that needs to start being used to make more of the homes that already exist, bring more of them into the social housing, into the genuinely affordable living rent housing that we need. And so because I'm on the London Assembly, we were able to put forwards a genuine budget amendment that said we were going to use this grant money to invest in new homes, use the surplus rent from those initial phase of new homes to borrow more money to create a magnifying, a multiplying fund. And this was signed off by the people in City Hall. So it is possible. All it takes is the political courage and vision to actually try something new. And I think people are genuinely up for trying something new this time. They're up for trying us as a new party they've maybe not voted for before, but also the new ideas that we're bringing forward. People are looking at them and going, actually, yeah, that's a great idea. I really want to vote for that. We're getting a really strong response to a lot of the things we're putting forward.
Well, and just say that 500 million, that's what I've committed to, actually. And the amazing thing in Bristol is that we have a lot of council housing compared to other cities proportionally. So we can therefore borrow quite a lot, actually, against our existing council housing. And, you know, the interesting thing is that we worked with the Labour cabinet member around housing to come up with this plan last year. The start of it got voted through, then that person was kicked out of the mayor's cabinet, and lo and behold, they've gone back to that sort of reductive, not ambitious view. So we put forward the same amendment, it got turned down. So now there's a choice for the city that they can actually vote for a party and somebody who's going to see that through, which actually means there's less vulnerable people on the streets. There's more people with a place to call home, and we reckon we'd reduce carbon emissions by about 75% too. So that the plan is there. Frustratingly, interestingly, even Labour agreed it was a good plan, and now they've shelved it, which just seems crazy to me. So yeah, vote Green and you'll get it.
And that's the good thing. So you don't need, because of borrowing rates being so low at the moment for public bodies, you don't need that much revenue.
Yeah, that's right.
To borrow as much. I'm so pleased your plan is as big as it is.
Yeah.
And then that's it. That's we are prepared to take the leap and get on with this. And these are low risk things, particularly my plan, which is buying homes that have already been built. That's very low risk. This is one of the most solid things you can do. And if you've got 500 million in seed money, why would you not do it? Why is it just sitting there?
Yeah, and Sian, you were talking about sort of winning over or having unlikely allies in this housing issue. One of the first debates I took part in the House of Lords was actually one of the bishops got up and said a sentence that could have basically been taken from any of my speeches back when I was Green Party leader, said, "We have to stop treating housing primarily as a financial asset and regard it as a secure, affordable place for people to live." And, you know, well, I could sit there and go, we don't do this in the House of Lords, but go, yay, it was Green Party policy, exactly. We've got a whole lot of great questions here covering some of the sort of issues that we haven't covered across, because, of course, for mayors, there's so many different issues. So I'm just going to sort of try and do this as slightly quick fire, try and get 4 or 5 questions at least in, and sort of a minute each from each of you if I can, just to and the first question up was something close to my own heart as a Sheffield tree campaigner and a real case that demonstrates where campaigning works. Sheffield, you know, people actually had to put their body on a line. A Green councillor was arrested, although subsequently found not guilty of anything, to protect Sheffield trees. And Sheffield now has a wonderful agreed tree action plan to try and save mature trees, to protect the natural environment in cities, protect the wildlife in cities. Sian, if I can come to you first, you some thoughts about London wildlife, London greenery, those really important mature trees.
Yeah, we have a lot of similar battles in London. I mean, our street trees are constantly under threat, and that is a real problem. And that was the Sheffield plan effectively was to privatise the management of the street trees, at which point the people who were given the contract decided they were all too expensive. And that's just so wrong. The value of a mature tree is almost incalculable. We have a problem in London with a lot of trees like that being cut down as part of developments. And that's one of the big things I've worked on as a assembly member, is winning a new policy so that residents on estates are the ones now who have a final say in a ballot over whether or not a redevelopment plan goes ahead. And the point of that is not so much that everything gets planned and then turned down. The point is to stop bad things being promoted in the first place, and to genuinely involve residents in planning from the start. And so one of my policies for this election is to go further than that and have a People's Land Commission, where people themselves in local areas are looking at what's in their area, what they value, what they want to preserve, and trying to plan for new homes, new community facilities and new parks, you know, whatever you want to find space for in your area, and plan it yourself. And I cannot imagine any local community would come up with some of those plans that raise to the ground all of the mature trees in an area and start from scratch. You get, that's the view of somebody who's looking down on their area from above, like it's on a map, and just scrubbing everything out and starting from scratch. If you were to develop your own area, you'd preserve all of your trees, you'd preserve the homes. You wouldn't want to demolish perfectly good homes and break up communities. You'd search for those pieces of land that were genuinely asking for a change of use, that were genuinely neglected, or were spaces that you could infill within estates, like putting extensions on the end of wings, you know, using the car park. I've got it down on car parks, obviously, but those are the kinds of things that residents themselves come up with. And I think we've, you know, trees are citizens of our city too, and absolutely need to be defended. And the other thing that I want to do is have a proper strategy for the green belt around London, where we do much more rewilding and make and much more farming. Agroforestry is one of the things that I'm sure I'm smiling at you, Natalie, because I know you're into this kind of thing. We want to have more farming, more leisure, more walking routes around the green belt, more access to it, along with a lot more tree planting and a lot more rewilding. And that will be good for flood defences in London, as well as everyone's well-being. And I think that's one of the things. There's a lot of, the government has a long-term friendship with big developers, and big developers want us to build bypasses so they can build sprawl developments on green fields, and they are constantly threatening the green belt. And I think if we don't make the most of it and have a real strategy for improving the green belt, we will lose it. So yeah, use it or lose it on the green belt. And my policy is essentially called gold plate the green belt, because there's so many ways in which we could really make it work for London. And that's a very exciting thing. Current mayor's not even thought about doing that, because it involves working with the councils who are around London, who have a lot of the green belt under their control, and he won't work with Conservative councils. And I think as a Green, I'm no one's worst enemy. I can do this.
And I think from my previous personal visits to Bristol, I think Sandy might have some reflections relating to that as well. Over to you, Sandy.
Yeah, so look, I echo absolutely what Sian says about listening to communities. You know, when we're talking about livable neighbourhoods, pedestrianisation, green spaces, actually communities know what they want. And sometimes it's even as simple as, you know, planting a few more trees, repairing a children's playground, rewilding a bit of a park. But actually, I've also seen it done badly, and I'm afraid on occasions Greens can be a bit over enthusiastic, say around pedestrianisations or livable neighbourhoods, and impose things. That's not the right way to do it. And to really listen to communities. I was in the south of the city a few days ago, talking about a livable neighbourhood that actually just the council had proposed just changing one street, but you go around the area and they said, well, it's a good idea, but actually if you thought of it bigger with the park here and changing this street and that street, and everybody agreed. And the interesting thing was, I think it would, if that proposal had come forward having been consulted with the community, it's much more likely to succeed. So starting with communities is a really important thing. And as you say, then people do automatically protect trees and parks because they value them, especially now post-pandemic. And I think, you know, as I say, then there's a couple of other things that I've talked briefly about, the idea of net gain. So any new development has to see an improvement in biodiversity. So that encourages developers to develop brownfield sites, because the net gain it doesn't have to be huge, but greenfield sites become very, very difficult because actually they are so valuable both to the community and to wildlife. And we do have a plan of corridors, wildlife corridors across the city that we would like to see to tackle climate change. We're very lucky actually in Bristol, we've got a very physically green city. There is quite a lot of open space, but we want to make sure that those are joined up. Sometimes that means going through people's gardens, and all that means is putting pollinator plants, asking residents to put pollinator plants in their garden. But we can create those green fingers that go through the city that are both great for communities and great for wildlife too.
Thanks very much. I think that's a vision a lot of people can definitely get behind. Coming to another question from the chat box, this is Councillor Dr. Miles asking a question about local procurement for resilience to promote health and well-being. And I think perhaps to broaden that out a little, thinking about how we make our cities prosperous places. And many different other parts of the country looking at London and Bristol might think, well, what do you need to do? But of course, what we need is strong local economies in every community, and diverse economies, not relying on the financial sector or not relying on very specific industries, and getting lots of our local supplies, encouraging small independent businesses, cooperatives, those sorts of things. So Sandy, if I can come to you first, what's some thoughts about that kind of encouraging small independent businesses and co-ops in Bristol?
Yes, absolutely. So that has to be key for climate reasons. You travel less, for local employment, keeping money locally, all of those things that you say. And actually, we've committed that within our manifesto that we would make sure that at least 30% of the contracts let by Bristol City Council would go to local firms, which is a jump from about sort of 22%, I think, at the moment. And that for me is really key in order to create jobs and protect our environment. And we get into the technicalities, but you can do that through a thing called social value and the way that contracts are procured. So I don't think it's a particularly difficult thing to do. And having also running an organisation that is a contractor with Bristol City Council, I know how much that means and how different local services, when services are provided locally by local companies and local charities rather than sort of big national organisations, how much of a better service you get, how much added value you get. It makes a real difference. So, and I think I'm quite proud. Lots of people talked about the Preston model as the sort of standard for that. I think Bristol is already better than the Preston model, but I'm not, actually, don't hold me to that. But several people have said we're already good at it and we just need to improve it.
Great. And Sian?
Yeah, I mean, London, I've been saying for years, and you've been saying it too, that London really needs a more diverse economy. We're a global city, and we depend far too much on the financial services industry and on things that do not make the world better and do not make London's economy very secure. What we've seen since the last financial crisis was very much austerity affecting the lives of many, many people across London, whilst the very richest people in London got richer and richer and richer. Inequality is out of control, and inequality is in itself a bad thing for a city like London. And since I've been an assembly member, it's even got worse. We've been, because of the density of London and the number of people, we've been the test bed for a lot of these app-based jobs that are incredibly precarious, where people do not have even the most basic terms and conditions. Their wages are so low. Uber drivers working for something like £2 an hour because Uber just do not care about the fact that these are genuine workers who need a living wage. And there's been huge battles about all of this. And we do need to absolutely transform our economy. And that means building up more businesses that are not only more self-sufficient in terms of the resources within London, but also more in terms of recycling the profits they make back into the community. I want to see so many more local, smaller businesses, cooperative startup, more spaces for people to rent at an affordable rent. And I really think it's important that we have a basic income and a basic income trial in London to show the difference it makes to those people who are stuck in the most precarious positions and the deepest poverty, as well as the life chances of people who want to get involved in some of the most exciting industries that we have in London, which have low resource use, like the creative industries and the digital industries, and things that are currently have barriers to entry for people of colour, for people from the working class, for women quite often. These are things that we need to be breaking down those barriers for. And there are budgets within City Hall about adult education, about work, and we've got influence we can have on workplace rents and working conditions. There's a real need for a mayor who's got a mission to genuinely transform the economy of London and make it work better for everybody, and that's something I really want to work on an awful lot.
I'm going to, following on from that, a question from Emma Edwards about implementing UBI trials. How would you see these working? So I'm going to make this a quick fire, just about a minute, a couple of quick thoughts. Sandy, if I come to you first, just very quickly.
Oh gosh, so I've committed to one. I would very much like to work with the UBI lab in Bristol to work out exactly how we do that. I'm assuming we take a sort of a cohort of sort of 500 people, give it a try, you know, run it over a couple of years, ideally, to see what difference it makes. But I'm a great believer in it. You know, we've just seen how much of a difference it's made over the last year, having that sort of guaranteed income to people's lives. So absolutely, now is the time to do that. And in terms of technical detail, I'd want to work with the UBI lab to work out exactly how to do that. Sian?
Yeah, take a look at my manifesto. I've got 2 major trials of 1,000 people each, one for basic income across the a broader group of people, and one that's called creative autonomy allowance, which is specifically targeted at younger people who want to get access to more entrepreneurial business or creative careers where there are barriers. And I think it's important we have these trials in as many different places as possible to show how it can work for different people in different places. So there's a number of micro trials that I want to do. That much I can fund through the GLA's own budgets, but I'd be really keen to see research organisations and charities help boost the numbers so that we're showing something that's properly comprehensive and really does prove that it works, because I think that's what we can do from our cities.
Sticking to the kind of quick fire thing so we can get a couple more questions in before we run out of lunchtime time. Peter Gregg asks about policing, particularly talking, I assume from London, talking about the Metropolitan Police and concerned about institutional racism and sexism and the way the police act. We can all think of some recent examples. Sian, I know it's difficult, but quick fire, about a minute on policing, if we could.
There's a proper crisis in policing in London. I mean, I've been on the London Assembly Police and Crime Committee for 5 years, and I've seen again and again the police bring in new tactics which are actually counterproductive. I want to rethink policing in London from first principles, work with Londoners to genuinely rethink what we use police for and what the purpose is, and divert a lot of resources from enforcement. And I've already said I want to reduce the amount of cannabis enforcement there is, divert that money into genuine prevention. We need to build up a stronger, healthier society, and having the police getting more and more power over us and more control and using more and more intrusive tactics, which are always used in a discriminatory way, is the opposite of what we need. And I really hope that Londoners will vote for this time, because it's the sort of thing that once there's public opinion behind it, it's very hard for the police to say no. And at the moment, they are very much resisting this. They are trying to get more and more control. Natalie, in the Lords, they're trying to push through laws to have more control over our protests and our free speech and our rights in various different ways. It won't do anyone any good. It'll make things worse. And it's so important that we have strong voices in City Hall that are holding the police to account over this and genuinely arguing for a different approach. Now, I know in Bristol you're not standing for PCC, is for Sandy, but that's her platform too, isn't it, more or less?
Yes, very much so. So look, I mean, good policing is policing by consent, right? When there is trust between the people and the police, it works really, really well. And I have to say, I'm going to say 2 different things about the police. The police in Bristol have, up until 2 or 3 weeks ago, actually done a very good job. They policed Black Lives Matter and the protests at the beginning of lockdown and the Sarah Everard vigil very well in Bristol. Things started to go wrong in the riots that we saw and some police brutality that we saw 2 or 3 weeks ago in Bristol. Thankfully, it is being resolved. But what becomes clear in a situation like that is that there are some communities, whether it's the Black community, the traveller community, just do not trust the police for historic reasons. And actually, Cleo, who is our Police and Crime Commissioner candidate, is interesting because she comes from a Black community. She's been an activist in her community and has the ability to bridge that gap and guide policing in a different way that will help to build that trust. Now, that's not something that's going to change overnight, but we have to get members of those communities into policing, whether it's in a political sense or community meetings. It will take time. But when those people start to meet the police understand them better and will understand the issues of racism and mistrust, and those communities understand that at their best the police are there to protect and to serve, then actually I think we can get back to policing by consent. And I'm really excited by Cleo's standing, because she would bring such a different voice to policing, certainly in our area, and it would be a really unique thing that I think might create some very interesting and worthwhile outcomes.
I think having a big public conversation about those principles of policing by consent is important. I think they're not well known enough. They're not embedded. I don't see them embedded in a lot of police conduct that I see. And we all need to be reminded of this. And I think it will help communities to realize that it's our job to hold the police to account. They are supposed to be part of the community and answerable to the community. And we should be more robust in getting involved in planning policing and what it's for, and not just be waiting for something bad to happen, but getting involved in making something good happen is what's really important.
Yes, and I think it's absolutely great, Cleo's candidacy. I did tweet about that when I saw it, and I think it's very exciting and has great possibilities. Now we're almost out of time. I'm very aware that this was advertised as a lunchtime thing, so we're definitely getting towards the end of lunchtime. I'm just going to squeeze in, and again, a really quick answer, but I think it's a good question to ask, from Hope Carpenter. How do we make sure that other candidates don't take up the climate and nature mantle and take credit for green policies? Sandy, over to you first.
Oh gosh, well, they've been doing it for 30, 40 years, haven't they? So I guess they're not going to stop it now. But I think certainly in Bristol, it's really interesting. So we've got a mayor who agreed with and supported the climate emergency that our Green councillors put forward, also supported the idea of an ecological emergency. There's strategies coming out of his ears and conversations, but you know what everybody's saying is, well, but nothing's actually happening, right? That plan, that vision, it's too scary for him to actually turn it into reality, even though actually by turning it into reality, things would get better. Not only would we tackle a climate emergency and other environmental issues, but the equality issues too. So how do we stop it? I think we need to do two things. One is we need to be totally committed to action, and be willing to see this stuff through. But I also think we need to be heard to be talking about issues like equality and representation. I think still we're seen as a party that only campaigns on green issues, and until we're seen as a party that can govern a city, that can run a city, then people won't quite take that leap. I think they're beginning to, but I think our image needs to change, and that's something we need to work on by having plans and really promoting our plans on education and special educational needs, that kind of stuff that isn't directly related to environmental issues, but is absolutely vital to people's day-to-day lives.
Sian?
I don't mind if other parties take up our proposals, particularly not if they, there are proposals and they vote for them in the assembly. That's not so bad. But what I don't like and what I don't want to see is other parties taking up peripheral bits of greenness and then saying that's enough. You really see where the lines are drawn when you get to policies that fix the system. When you ask for example, a smart system of road charging in London, the current mayor is too timid even to commission a study on this. He's scared of the headlines he will get. And that's his line is drawn. He's insisting on pressing ahead with a big road tunnel. He keeps supporting Gatwick expansion because he can't be for Heathrow expansion as London mayor. He's in favour of Gatwick expansion instead. No, do it to Surrey is what he says basically. And these are the things that worry me, is they'll do things that are peripherally or showily green and not really want to fix the system. They'll not really want to set a primary waste reduction target because there are big companies who depend on high levels of resource throughput in the economy. They will not fix the things at the absolute base and the absolute sort of nub of the issue. And that's where I think we need to make sure we're having our battles at these big sort of systemic changes that we need to make. And I think we're starting to win. I think the fact that basic income is now almost a mainstream issue and that would fix so many things so basically within the system. It just shows it can be done if we work hard enough and with enough different allies on issues to push them through. And then if those kinds of things get fixed, then I'm quite happy. But I think you'll get there a lot quicker with Greens actually elected, or with Greens in power having a final say over other parties' policies.
And so can I finish off this? Sorry to interrupt, Matt. That's actually the key, is to win power in cities, in local authorities around the country, because I think at the moment lots of people go, well, if the Greens ran things, would it be okay? We'd really see it through? If we actually win, we've done it in Brighton. Now, if we can do it in Bristol, London, and elsewhere, then actually I think people would start to trust that we really can do this stuff. And so therefore, from a practical point of view, get out there, deliver the leaflets, chip into our fundraisers and crowdfunders, spread the word, because actually I think that's the best way that we're going to stop people stealing our cloak, is by actually having the opportunity to deliver it on the ground in cities across the country.
And I think today we've heard a very inspiring vision of how that can be done, what needs to be done, and where we're going. And I think, Sian, we started with talking about system change, and we've circled back to it really. And, Sandy, that's what you were saying too. And also, I think we could keep going indefinitely, but this is a lunch meeting and we've hit the 55-minute mark. So we're pretty well up to the end. But just to finish on a reflection about getting elected, there's been an awful lot happened since, but it is worth remembering that 2 years ago there were local government elections in the UK, certainly not in London, but in those elections in 2019, the Greens more than doubled their number of Green councillors in a single election. I've always we've all got very educated about exponential graphs, very sadly lately with COVID, but if you start drawing an exponential line and you're doubling at each election, that starts to look quite good quite quickly. And also, of course, we're talking here about what are essentially genuinely democratic proportional elections, or at least AB elections. And the last ones of those in the UK was the European Parliament elections. And in that election, the Green Party nationally across the whole country got 12% of the vote. And we knocked the Tories into 5th place. So we actually finished ahead of the party of government in the last democratic election, you might say, across the UK. So these really are terribly exciting times. We've had, as Sandy just said, there's been in the chat box a whole lot of links, ways you can get involved, ways you can get active. We all know that, the last few weeks of an election campaign are an enormous sprint. And the more people contributing, the more momentum, the more speed that gets up there. So it's really important for people to do what they can, contribute what they can, get involved and get engaged. And I think I'm seeing in the chat box lots of people saying that they really have been inspired and engaged by today. So, I will finish with a little thought, which is we've had well over 180 people on this webinar. So thank you to everything that many of you I know have already been doing. And thank you to what you're going to do in the next few weeks. A little bit of emotional blackmail in there. And on that point, I'll hand back to Emma from the England and Wales webinar team. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Sian. Thank you, everyone who's come along this lunchtime.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Take care. And hope you'll get involved. See you soon. Cheers.